Welcome. My name is Mary Fernandez. I'm a member of 18 Doors Board of Directors. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Anita Diamant, author of Saying Kaddish, a wonderfully accessible and comprehensive guide to Jewish practices related to dying, death, and mourning. Anita is a best-selling author of 5 novels. She's also an award-winning journalist and the author of 6 nonfiction guides to contemporary Jewish life, most of which are on my bookshelf. Anita, welcome to 18 Doors.
Delighted to be with you.
Joining us in conversation today is Rabbi Robin Frisch. Rabbi Robin is director of 18 Doors Rukin Rabbinic Fellowship. Rabbi Robin is a passionate advocate for interfaith couples and families and committed to helping families of all kinds to feel comfortable doing Jewish. She also happens to be married to a rabbi and is the mother of a future rabbi. Thank you both for sharing your wisdom on death and mourning as seen through a Jewish lens. So I'd like to begin talking about the funeral service. Anita, where do Jewish funerals typically take place? And can anyone who is a member of a synagogue have their funeral at a synagogue?
First of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and to talk about a subject that means a lot to me. Actually, I just updated this book in 2019 because things had changed since I had written it in 1997, and maybe we can talk about that. So Jewish funerals, as far as I know, happen in one of 3 places. They happen graveside, they happen at the funeral parlor, and they happen in synagogues. And people do them in different places for a variety of different reasons. If you belong to a synagogue, and that would be part of your membership, that would be something that your clergy would hopefully know your family member. But if you have a gigantic sanctuary and there are going to be 30 people at the funeral, you might decide that you want to do it in a more intimate space, and that could be at the funeral home. And also, if the weather permits and if the health and welfare of the mourners permits, you can also do it at the graveside. All 3 places can be the scene of very powerful, moving, and emotionally and spiritually satisfying services. And as far as if anyone isn't a member of a synagogue, generally they aren't usually performed in a synagogue.
So Jewish funerals often begin with mourners tearing a Korea ribbon. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what a Korea ribbon is and why do people wear them?
Korea ribbon is a piece of black ribbon torn that has a tear in it that is usually given to the primary mourners right before the funeral, usually by a staff member of the funeral home. It dates back supposedly to the death of when Jacob thought Joseph had died in the book of Genesis, and he tore his clothes. So I think the rabbis connected this perhaps folk custom to that biblical story. Metaphorically, it's pretty clear. If you're in pain, your heart is ripped into your in grief. It sort of signifies where you are in your life. It's given to close family members. I think for parents, that's on one side, and for everyone else that you're mourning, it's on the other side. It's usually only worn during the week of Shiva, but a lot of people, including me, wore it longer for the whole month because it was a way of letting people know that I was in a different space. If they knew enough to know what that meant or asked me what it meant, it was a way to inform the world that I was in a fragile state, and please be careful of me. And it used to be, and some people still tear a piece of clothing. The ribbon replaces the idea of torn clothing. Since you wear it for a whole week at least, you might not want to be wearing the same sweater or the same sport jacket or whatever it is. And so the ribbon saves your clothes, and it also means you can wear different things at different times.
Thank you. Rabbi Robin, Korea ribbons are traditionally worn only by Jews who were, as Anita pointed out, immediate relatives of the deceased. Do you find that relatives of the deceased who are not Jewish want to wear them as well? And what about Jewish relatives wearing them for a relative, a loved one who isn't Jewish?
I do find that. In fact, it's interesting because, as Anita explained, traditionally Kriya ribbons are worn by certain relatives, and it's defined. They're the quote unquote what I would call the ritual mourners. It's the children of the deceased, the parents of the deceased, the siblings of the deceased, and the spouses of the deceased. But I even find Jewish relatives sometimes want to be part of that ritual for their grandparents or someone they were very close to who may not fall into that category. And I often find it with relatives, especially spouses or children or sometimes stepchildren who are not themselves Jewish, but they lost a Jewish relative. They're at a Jewish funeral and they want to be part of that ritual as well. And, you know, as a liberal rabbi who wants people to feel welcome and connected, I have absolutely no problem, and I see this with colleagues as well, letting a relative who is not Jewish, who chooses to wear that Kriya ribbon, to wear it also. I also find for Jewish mourners that that's how they've learned to mourn, and that's what they've been taught throughout their whole life, that you wear a Kriya ribbon as a way of remembering a loved one. It's a way of, exactly as Anita said, letting people know that you're a mourner. Publicly, they see that, and even the experience of putting on that ribbon and saying the very short blessing and having that ribbon torn can be very powerful. So they may choose to do that for a loved one who comes from a different tradition, who's not Jewish as well.
Things are changing.
Things are changing.
And
Rabbi, don't you? For good. For the better.
Rabbi, do you feel also the people that Jews might want to wear a Kriya ribbon for a non-Jewish relative or friend or somebody who's very important to them as well, as a way of signifying that their heart is broken for somebody? It doesn't matter in some sense, really.
Absolutely, the same as they would for a Jewish relative or someone close to them. They have those same feelings of loss, and they find a Jewish ritual is powerful to them. Actually, Mary and I were having a conversation about something else once, and you said to me, the rabbi says, of course you can do it. You're doing that ritual for you. And that's exactly how I see it here. That Jewish person who's in mourning is doing it for them as their Jewish way of mourning. So just because the person they loved happened to be of another faith tradition, it doesn't stop being any less powerful for them to perform this Jewish ritual.
Anita, tell us exactly, what are the basics of a Jewish funeral service?
Well, I'm a little hesitant to do this with the rabbi in the virtual room, but one of the things I love about Jewish tradition is how very simple it is, that you can describe a wedding in one sentence. You can describe any important life cycle ritual very quickly because they happen very short. So I think at the basics, the building blocks are Psalm 23, which is the Lord is my shepherd psalm, often begins a funeral. The Hesped, which is the eulogy, is, I think, the emotional heart of a funeral. And the El Malei Rachamim prayers, which is often sung at the end. Those to me are the three basic requirements of a Jewish funeral for it to look like, feel like, that kind of thing. People add prayers, people add readings, people add songs. There are many eulogies at some funerals. Sometimes it's just the rabbi, sometimes it's only family members. And the El Malei Rachamim's melody, even if you're not familiar with it, has a kind of heartbreaking cadence and tone to it. There's no mistaking it when you hear this, that this is a wail of sadness. So I think those are the three elements that are the basis of a funeral. Rabbi, have I got it right?
I would agree. The only thing I would add related to your book is Saying Kaddish, which, yes, right. Saying Kaddish is the name of your book. Yes. Typically, if it's a funeral that's at the funeral home, we wait until we get to the graveside to actually recite the mourner's Kaddish. And I always remind people that the mourner's Kaddish does not even mention death. It's a prayer of praise of God. And, you know, in this case of a funeral, we're praising God for the life of our loved one and for our own lives. But those are really the major elements of a funeral. It's quite simple. And I'm sure you well know, Anita, that each rabbi is going to sit with the family and spend time with them, or cantor, and craft for them the service that is meaningful for them. But it typically always includes those basic elements.
Yes.
You've actually answered my next question, which is Rabbi Robin, what do you usually discuss with the family when you're meeting with them before the funeral?
So we do discuss the order of service, but even more importantly is I offer them the opportunity if someone, and regardless of religion, wants to speak about the person who they loved. And, you know, as Anita said, sometimes you'll have many people who choose to give a eulogy. Sometimes they'll say, Rabbi, we'll talk to you. That's your job. That's why you're here. So it really varies. But I think the main role I would give to mourners of any religion is to offer them the opportunity to speak at the funeral. And again, it doesn't mean you love your loved one any less if you hate speaking in public or you're feeling too emotional at the time. That's what I'm there for. And I can help to take what you shared and put that into a context and a framework. Occasionally someone, you know, as Anita mentioned, will want to sing something that the deceased loved, or to offer a particular poem. And I give them that opportunity, or to read a psalm, but more often than not, they'll choose to speak about their loved one. So I really just go through the basic structure of a service with them so they know what to expect. Ask if there's anything particular they would want to include. And again, the offer to speak. And even if there are 5 people speaking and, you know, I'm just going to really introduce and not give a eulogy, I think it's really important to me to hear about the loved one from their perspective. Even if I've known their loved one for 20 years, I think it's still really important to have that time of sharing privately when you're not at the funeral, and for them to share about their loved one and what that person meant to them. And that's always the most meaningful part for me personally.
And from the perspective of the family and as a mourner, it's a really important time to be able to talk out loud, to speak about the loved one in the presence of others, of other members of the family. It's very cathartic, and it makes, I think for a lot of people, it makes the funeral possible, that to have walked through their grief with you and then have to be in public with it. So it's very much part of the grieving process and the process of the Jewish way in death and mourning. Yeah.
Thank you.